Hi everyone.
Hello.
How is everyone doing? Is everyone excited for our first day as Clearwater Church? I'm pumped. I'm over the moon. Sorry about our lack of punctuality this morning. We're just figuring out how to feed all you and organize this room, and we'll be better next Sunday. Thank you all so much for coming. This is going to be a real treat for us, I know. Aaron and I have just briefly gotten to know Noah. He's going to be our presenter for the next 5 weeks, right, Noah?
Yeah, 6.
6. Wow, thank you, Noah. He's with a ministry at CSU called Ratio Christi. What's that mean? It's Latin for the reason.
Latin for Ration of Christ.
Yeah. So hope you all know why you're here. If you just found your way in because you smelled food, well, welcome. Noah's going to introduce himself and tell us why he's here more. Thank you, Noah. Let's give him a round of applause. Thanks for being here, Noah.
Well, thank you guys for having me. This is a really cool thing to be able to do this. It's especially cool. I know this is your guys' first kind of week as a church together, and so it's an honor to really be a part of that. Kind of unexpected in that way. But I'm really excited to be with you guys during this time and hopefully share some things that will help challenge your faith and strengthen your faith in this. So a little bit even about me. Some of you guys are like, Noah, who is this guy? Is the Noah from the Bible? Or Russell Crowe as Noah in the movie? Or all that sort of thing? Does he have a big beard? Yes, I do have a big beard. It's been longer at different times. I was from a beard competition that I won at another church once. And this was another time when I was growing it out a little crazy. So I'm from Fort Collins, born and raised here. So I thought it'd be kind of fun for a lot of you guys being locals to see maybe if any of us have been to the same school. So I went to Trout Elementary School. Anybody from Trout? Nobody? We got one. Hey, so I was the first class to kind of go all the way through that, which was really cool. Went to Bolts. Anybody? No.
Yeah, I
no
went for
Phoenix?
half a semester. No,
You went half a semester.
and
I'll take it.
drop out.
All right. And then I went to Fossil Ridge. Any Fossil? Yes. Say once. All right. And then after that, I did 2 years at Front Range, and then I went to CSU. All right, I know there's a bunch of CSU students here, so that's awesome. Excited to have you guys. I graduated from CSU with a philosophy major and an English minor. And so that was a cool year. It was definitely a time that was challenging to my faith. In philosophy classes taught by atheist professors that are giving the arguments for and against God, and frankly, their arguments for God weren't the best because they're not Christians. And so that was an interesting thing, kind of learning in some ways to try to hold my own against these professors that obviously know way more than I do and that sort of thing. So that's kind of my Fort Collins history in a sense. And then some other things that I've done is actually straight out of Fossil, I went to a Bible school called Cape and Ray, which is actually out in England. It's in Lancaster, England, about 70 miles south of the Scottish border. And if you would look at the school, it's basically like Hogwarts. That's the school. So it was an awesome year. It was really one of the funnest years of my life. Going to school with all these people from all over the world. There was probably about 20 different countries represented and about 170 students that were out of school. So going to school with people from all over the world, going to school with people at really different stages of life was really cool too. Most of us were straight out of high school, but then there was a few people that were pastors even, who'd been pastors for 6 years or something like that. And so studying with them and kind of being mentored by them during that year just made for a really fun year. Not to mention, if you're in Europe, being able to travel around a little bit and see the world was really fun. So that was one thing that I did. I also did a trip called World Race. And so World Race I did straight out of college. And it's an 11-month missions trip to 11 different countries. And since I know everyone's going to ask what countries did I go to, here's the list. I started off, we went to Malaysia, Australia, Cambodia, Vietnam, India, Nepal, Kenya, Rwanda, Tanzania, Ukraine, and Romania. So I spent a month in each of those countries doing all sorts of different missions. In Kenya, we literally built a church out of sticks, like cutting down the trees, lopping off the branches, using those for the main beams and the whole shebang. When we were in Malaysia, we were reaching out to the homeless. There was all sorts of, if you can imagine, any sorts of missions, probably did it in one of those countries. So that was a really cool experience, but also a really hard experience. I was in charge of logistics during that trip. So with the 50 of us that would travel from country to country, then we'd split into teams of about 7. Me and one other person were in charge of all of the travel and all of those logistical fun things during that, which was not the funnest thing to do, but it was challenging and growing. And other parts during the trip made it kind of hard like that too. Eventually, I joined on board with Ratio Christi, which is who I'm kind of here with today. And like I said earlier, it means Ration of Christ. Through both my time in high school and especially my time in college, what I just started to see is that there's people that are leaving the faith, are leaving Christianity because they don't feel like there's good answers to hard questions that they have about the Christian faith. And from my own experiences, I was realizing there's good answers out there, but people just aren't getting them. And so I wanted to be involved in being a part of making that sort of thing happen. Joined on board with Ratio Christi. I also started seminary shortly before that. So I've been going to a school called Southern Evangelical Seminary. It's actually in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm just taking classes online. But they really focus on this whole area of defending Christianity in the secular environment, looking at history, science, philosophy, those sort of things, and how those really point to the existence of God and how it points to Christianity being true. So that's kind of me. That's my story really quick in a nutshell. And then also I have a blog called Bearded Disciple, and that's just one of the other ways that I try to kind of get information out and kind of serve in that way. So if you get a chance, feel free to check out my blog. One thing that I thought would be a really beneficial way to kind of start things off, as we're going to kind of dive into this stuff for the next 5 weeks or so, is with our club, we have students that come that aren't Christians and end up, asking a lot of questions in the middle of our times, and being able to, that's really great training ground, and it's a really great way to reach out to people. And so with that, I thought, hey, maybe it would be cool to bring one of those students here and have them kind of present, this is the case for what they believe, and kind of have the other side be shown a little bit so you guys kind of know this is what you might need to be prepared for. So I asked my buddy Jonathan if he would be willing to come and kind of share a little bit of his atheist perspective with you, and then have a little bit of dialogue with you guys about it. And so he agreed graciously to do that. It's a little uncomfortable for him to be here.
I haven't been set on fire yet.
Yeah. So don't drill him too hard. Let him be loving in it, but he's going to kind of present his case a little bit. So I'm going to give you this because we're going to try to record it all too.
We love you, Jonathan. Don't be worried, man.
It's a little weird.
Don't be scared.
Yeah. You're safe here.
So yeah, like Noah said, I am Jonathan. I'm from Dallas, Texas, computer science student. I'm a junior. Ran into Noah on campus. We've had very spirited debates in the past. I hope that this could be a good time. I want to, I'm sure you've heard atheist arguments before. I'm not a terrible person. I'm not a monster. Hopefully you can understand that. I just wanted to show my side to it, and see what you guys had to say. I personally struggle a lot with religion because I think, and I mean no offense by this, but I think it's a little bit weak in a way because I just believe in one less God than you guys do. I've just gone one step further than you have. I don't believe in Zeus. I don't believe in Krishna. I don't believe in the Buddhist gods. I don't believe in the Hindu gods. I don't believe in deities. There's one step that you guys haven't taken that you don't feel comfortable taking. As an atheist, I don't have to. It's not proving a belief. It's a lack of a belief in anything. I don't believe that there is fairies out there that can provide miracles and make things happen. Looking at it from a philosophical point of view, I hope you would concede to me that to prove that an idea is false, you just have to prove that its basic tenets are inconsistent. We wouldn't have to search the state of Wyoming, I hope you would agree, to look for a square circle. We wouldn't have to look through the entire state to concede that there are no married bachelors in Wyoming. So if at its basic tenets an idea is self-contradictory and it contradicts itself, then we can show that it's false. One of the problems I have, just throwing them out, is you look at the Trinity. You look at this idea of three persons that are all individual persons, and yet they're all one. No one throughout the entire intellectual history of the church, it's the deep divine mystery of the Trinity, as we all say. It's something of faith to understand at a logical standpoint. You look at, and I make no personal remarks about this, but in logic, there's something called the argument out of ignorance, where none of you would argue, I hope, that, like the ancient Greeks did, that lightning was caused by Zeus. Where you see some natural phenomenon, and we are not in a position to fully understand it and fully grasp it. They used to think that you didn't have to wash your hands because, they didn't know about bacteria, and that the bad omens in your body, the bad energy, would kill you, and you had to, let your blood out. They believed that lightning was caused by Zeus. We learn more and more and more as we go through the scientific method and the naturalistic way of understanding things. And to say that, it's just God did it, is, as you've heard the God of the gaps argument. To say, well, there's all these gaps and we're filling them one by one, but God is still in charge of these things that we don't understand over here. So like I said, it's not taking that one more step to say, how many gaps do we have to fill in before we can say, not that it's logically inconsistent so much as that it's just not plausible. You can see to me that a unicorn is not logically inconsistent. A horn and a horse are not at odds with each other. A horse could have a horn. We've never found one, but it doesn't mean it can't exist. A square circle cannot exist. It's just a logical contradiction. But we can search, we could all go out and spend the rest of our lives searching and never find a unicorn. And we could say with a high certainty, I am comfortable with saying that I've looked and God does not exist, and He's out there hiding somewhere. It's one of the main problems that I have is that you have a God who seems to hide himself very well. You would think that he would show himself up on the billboards, that he would show up on the CSU Glory Plaza, that he would come down and he would make himself known so that especially the people that have never heard of him could say, well, I used to not believe, like myself, and then I see him in the flesh, and then all of a sudden a miracle happens and Angel Gabriel comes down and I'm a believer, and I can spend eternity in heaven with this God that loves me. One of the logical inconsistencies I think that troubles me the most is you have a God that's, I hope you would concede, all loving and all powerful and all knowing. But yet for some reason he finds it that he needs to doom people and send people to an eternity apart from him because they didn't believe. Now either he is not all loving and he doesn't want everyone to come into his fold and spend eternity with him, or he could do it but he's not powerful enough, or he just doesn't care, or he doesn't exist. If God wants everyone to be with him for eternity, which is a really long time, I struggle with, what about the kid out in the jungle? What about the kid who died yesterday in a car accident? What about the kid who was schizophrenic? That had no choice, that could not understand this idea of this ancient doctrine that ignorant shepherds wrote, possibly. Yeah, no offense. That comes down through the centuries, that's been changed over and over and over again, this idea of like the telephone game. And because he did not believe and know, and maybe he couldn't read. And God somehow says, well, I'm sorry, but you're out of luck. I mean, you look in John, and if the verse is still there, it says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one shall come to the Father except through me, right? And I think it's a very exclusive claim. I would say the major points to me, and I'd love to hear your feedback on this. If I'm wrong, I'd shoot back at me. But the problem of evil in the world, that there is so much needless suffering that God could prevent, that there are disabilities, that there are cleft palates, that there are Down syndrome, that there are horrible, horrible accidents and natural suffering that no person individually caused. But also, when Christians say things like I am the way, the truth, and the life, no one can come to the Father except through me, it's like you're claiming a monopoly on the truth. You're saying, well, we know that Hinduism and Buddhism and Confucianism and Taoism and Zen Buddhism and Mormonism and Jehovah's Witness and Muslims, they're all wrong. That we know that we are correct, and we follow these doctrines that we know are right, but everyone else is wrong. It's something that I struggle to be. It seems very disingenuous to say, I will look at all these other religions, which I hope you have, and point out their falsities, but I won't really look into my own and see the internal inconsistencies and the logical problems and the paradoxes at a philosophical level. But then you come into the more physical realm of the Bible through the centuries, and we see again this idea that you really take it on faith that this person of Jesus Christ of Nazareth existed 2,000 years ago, that he really died and then rose again from the dead. And then we look down through the centuries and we see that the Bible's been changed, and we see that things have not been the same throughout the ages. And one of the problems to me is that, again, with the God of the Gaps, you look back and you see that these shepherds who were out in their fields watching their sheep at night were writing a book that would have such ramifications centuries and thousands, millennia later, before an idea of running water and sanitation and basic medical practices and the scientific knowledge that we have today. I think atheism is slowly closing the gap on Christianity. And I had to look at it and say, well, which side am I going to be on? Am I going to be on the side that's going with science and where science is headed, when the vast majority of scientists can't be wrong. I mean, you go with the people that have invested their entire careers into furthering scientific information. Or I could hold on to this belief because I haven't gone that one step further and cut ties, no matter how emotionally hard that might be, and the social and moral ramifications of that. But if I did, I could join the winning side. I could join, and I could further scientific knowledge. I could plug some more of the gaps. I could help end world hunger. I could help genetically modify food. I could work on the future of humankind and civilizations and anything else. Again, I mean no offense. It's something that I'm very passionate about, because I see that it's I think, especially in the scientific community, holding us back from what we could be and what we could achieve. If we went that one step further and said, well, we're just all going to come clean with ourselves, and we're going to look at our own faith with that same fine-toothed comb, and the internal inconsistencies of the Bible and our philosophical, theological beliefs. And I think a lot of Christians worry that if that happened, then, of course, then you say, well, if there's no God, then who do you look to for your moral standard? We were all go around eating babies like the crazy atheists. You're like, we'll go murder people. Like, there's no grounding. And it's one of the things I struggle with to say, well, we're not, going around. I'm not going around killing people. I have a basic moral standard that I love everyone else and I do unto others. I guess it comes down to the golden rule. That it's like this idea that society itself will unravel because we don't have the grounding in the moral fiber from this ancient text to make us.
I'm so sorry, that was a huge spider.
To make us feel important, I would say. I hope that flowed as an argument. To reiterate really quickly, logically it's consistent ideas like a married bachelor. If they're untenable, they are untenable. We have to agree that at some point you can't logically hold to it, so it's taken on faith. It's logically implausible, like a unicorn. It may be there, but it's not worth our time to look for it, and we're most likely not going to find it. At what point do you have to say, I've dropped a pen so many times and it always falls, gravity is always consistent, and then to look out there and apply that to your own worldview and belief, and to say, well, I realize that it's not consistent anymore. But then the very real problems of evil, of biblical inconsistency, of some of the atrocities that have been carried out in the name of religion throughout the history of the world. And just really the monopoly on the truth to say, well, we know that we are correct. I could be wrong. I'm not. I try to be. I talk to Noah about this all the time because he's like, you have to be an open-minded atheist. And I'm like, I am. I could be very wrong. But at some point, you have to say, I dropped the pen 50,000 times, and the 50,001st time, it's not going to stay in the air, and gravity's going to say, screw you, buddy, I'm not going to fall again because you keep messing with me. It's going to be consistent over and over and over again. And it's one of the reasons why I love the scientific method to say, we can prove truth over and over and over again in the lab consistently. And that's where we can draw things from and we can build from there. We can't do that with faith. I don't know if you've ever had a debate with an atheist. I would love to hear your questions. Please don't crucify me. I'm sorry. I hope that there has been no personal slight. But I believe it's the most important question you can ask, right? We're always saying that. Well, it's got eternity in the balance. Pascal's wager. If I'm wrong, I'm screwed. If you're wrong, at least you were a good person. All these things. I hope that not to be the case. I believe that Marcus Aurelius famously said, I should not fear death because when I am here, death is not here. And when I am not here, death is here. So we're never in the same place at the same time, so I'm not going to fear it. And if I die, then that's going to be the end of me. And I hope that I didn't let things hold me back and that I furthered society as well as I could. So I don't know if you guys have any questions. I kind of didn't prepare. Like I just kind of went with what I believe. Those were my main, I think, I could talk about other smaller topics, but these were my main, I think, the main sticking points. If anyone has any groundbreaking thoughts or questions. Yes, what was your name?
Spencer.
Spencer,
I definitely don't have a groundbreaking thought.
Okay.
But you said that we claim to have a monopoly on truth. The only thing I would ask you, and thank you for coming and talking to us. This is awesome. Does truth change whether everybody believes it or not? Like, is truth subjective?
It goes back to that famous objective versus subjective. The objective truth is in the object. So it is objectively true of the object, that chair, that it is a chair. And subjective truth is subjective to me as the person, as the subject. I subjectively like Rocky Road ice cream. I believe that, yes, subjective truth can change over time, but it's like this middle out quality. We've averaged, as a pre-prime, I think we're born with this naturalistic evolutionary desire to help people. If you look at studies of babies that are born that have not been, there's no real nature or nurture that's like messed with them yet, I guess nurture, and that they desire to help others and as society have us succeed. Now, when you extrapolate that out to laws and morals and ethics, you could say, well, it is objectively true that rape is wrong because we have decided, as a society, it is not in the best interest of that person in their subjective idea of it to be raped or murdered or killing babies for fun. I do think that objective truths change over time. That as a society, we can really create our own moral landscape. I don't think that we have to rely on God to say, well, if the famous Christian argument, if God doesn't exist, then how can I say what is good and what is bad? Well, you look famously at the economic man who says, it's good or it's bad if it's violating somebody else's rights. It's violating what someone else wants to do. It's violating their well-being and their pursuit of happiness. I hope that.
Yeah, definitely. So the only other thing I would ask is, if there is objective truth, and you said that it changes, but there is, that would be true whether one person believed it or whether millions of people believed it, correct?
Sure.
So the fact that we have a monopoly on it doesn't make it not true, does it?
Not necessarily, but to say
just
that
as a premise, like just
as a premise, no, that's not
okay.
that's not a fallacy to say. I mean, truth is true. I guess sometimes I'd say that scientific truth is true because it's true. Moral truth can be true because we make it true. I think there's those terms of like objective and absolute that maybe kind of get misconstrued sometimes.
Sure.
I just think that really, if you look at it, the only way to tell any truth that matters, I would argue, is through the scientific method. To look at it and say, can we repeat it? What can we probe? What can we test? What can we find? What can we see? Where that comes into morality is kind of we're still exploring it. But to say that that's why science is so amazing. That's why science furthers culture, because we can look at it and say, this is what we've done, this is what we can test, this is what we can tangibly, rationally prove. In our limited mindset, we know this to be true. And any other truths, I think, hold less weight. They're less impactful because you say, well, hold it by faith.
Okay.
I hope you guys, yes. What was your name?
I'm Jarrett.
Spencer?
Yes, sir.
Jarrett, okay.
So you said that you believe Scripture has been changed over time.
I mean, that's a broadly.
So what do you believe about the Dead Sea Scrolls?
So the Dead Sea Scrolls, as far as I'm aware, they do provide a really good historical basis for the Old Testament. But you look at, I was specifically referring to the doctrine of the New Testament where, because you'd agree with me, right, that the crux of the matter is the resurrection. If Jesus never existed, if he never died, if he never rose from the dead, he either never existed or he was a liar. So if you look at, yes, Abraham could have been a person. Yes, these historical things could have happened. But then you look at the person of Jesus and say, you look at the Roman social pressures of his name will come to me. First Christian Roman emperor, who realized that there was a lot of social pressure, through the Council of Laodicea and the Council of Nicaea, that we could come up with this doctrine of that Jesus Christ is God. And all of a sudden, here we have the Christians that were persecuted, the mainstream religion of Rome, and all of a sudden it's accepted through his visions. When he went into battle and he's like, well, I'm a Christian now. And now I believe that God is Jesus and Jesus is God and he rose from the dead. And all of a sudden it becomes, since the Roman times, from the Council of Nicaea, you can trace it all the way down through the Crusades, through the ages to today, of the social impact of Christianity. Where it goes from this kind of backwater, persecuted, fairly large cult, I guess, to what it is today, because all of a sudden you have the backing of the Roman government, I would say. other than that, it's hard for me to. I mean, we get down to Mark. We say the Bible's infallible, and yet you look at the footers and end of Mark, and they say, well, this is not in the earliest manuscripts. We added it in. We're not really sure where it's supposed to go, but yeah, we're sure that the Bible is never wrong. And to hold those two competing views, to say every single word of Scripture is coherent with itself, it doesn't contradict itself, but yet we have these. It's Mark, and then I think there's one other short paragraph where it's talking specifically about a miracle Jesus did, or his interactions with other people. That, it's just a paragraph here and there, or it's a half chapter. But I think it points to the thing of nobody was there, and nobody can concretely say Jesus said these things. We're taking it on faith. And again, whenever you say I take things on faith, I say, I don't know if that's the answer you had in mind.
So can I ask you? You just said nobody was there. But the writers of the Gospels were there.
Sure.
Okay. So how is that different than any other book, any other historical writing that you would read? Why are those to be discounted and others are to be held true? Because you weren't there for those.
Exactly, and I wasn't there either. So I can see the problem with that. Yes, those individuals could have existed and been there, just like we exist now, and we could write about this. But I think you look at, the passing down of oral tradition for 5 generations, 6 generations, and then we have these texts coming out that, then get spread around. No other historical text, I'd say, has the weight of, if you don't believe that this is true through this oral tradition, there could be very grave consequences. I could believe that Julius Caesar didn't exist, and I'd be wrong or ignorant, but that's not going to have impacts on my future eternity. To say that, well, I have to believe some shepherds and fishermen got everything right, and Jesus did everything that he did, and they didn't hallucinate, and they didn't make this up, and they didn't, that all of these other factors, that they're all false, and that he actually lived, and he actually did the things he did, and he died and rose again. And if I don't believe that in its entirety, I have some very grave consequences. That's really where I think the rub is there. Yes, what was your name? Oh, sorry, what was your name? Mike.
Thank you for coming.
Yes.
This is awesome.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Love having this conversation. It's awesome. One thing that you said about scientific fact and scientific proof, I'm quite surprised whenever I do talk to someone who is of the atheist persuasion and we get to having a conversation. Scientific facts are always the forefront of the conversation. But yes, scientists have proven this and that. So my question to you would be, and I've studied in great detail, the monkey trials.
Scopes trials?
Yes. And I've never heard an atheist yet to proclaim what they have found through the new scientific study, that the bone that they found was yet not another ape for the missing link. It was a jawbone of a pig. And so when they keep pressing me about scientific fact, is it not a fact that science has also proven that some of the things that, because of data has changed and the ability to study these have changed over the years, that in fact science has been found wrong as well. They've now proven that there was a huge volcanic eruption. The earth split in the area that's called the Sea of Reeds. It got transferred, went from Hebrew to Greek to Latin to English to the Red Sea.
The Red Sea.
And they have now found and proven through scientific study that there's chariots and bones and things of that nature in this fault line, swords and things that would prove that thousands of armies would have crossed that and then got entrapped in that when the earth opened up. There's also proof scientifically, since that was the crux of your real
Absolutely.
strong belief, that Sodom and Gomorrah, the area of Sodom and Gomorrah, that was nothing grows there anymore, that indeed going back to the astrology of those that lived back in the Magi, were able to document on stone, they're kind of like a clay round palette.
Sure.
And they would have this big opening in this room, and they would actually have a water pool, a still water pool, and they could see what was going on, and they could chart it on these little stone wet clays, and then they would dry them. They found and unearthed tons of those from history, and found that actually the area that they call Sodom and Gomorrah, that had fire raining down on it and big boulders, and they talk about hail coming out of the sky that was on fire when it hit the ground, just incinerated everything, that actually they were able to trace back that this comet had come through and rained
Sure.
down. It didn't change the fact for me, in my belief, because of who I believe God is and what I believe that He directs everything that He created. So I would ask you about that theory. Is it not correct and is it not truthful? Scientists have been proven wrong as well. So when I'm thinking of my faith and my belief, for me, I say, what is the harm in believing and adhering to something that makes me feel I'm not on this earth alone, as many of us do feel? What is the harm in believing that when I die, and I will say this, I don't know if anyone else in this room has died. Has anybody died in here?
Not in the last 20 minutes, hopefully. Well, not bored.
I've had a death experience.
Yeah. I'm glad you're still with us.
Yeah, thank you. And it changed my life. I know that I know that I know there is life after this. I have scientific proof of what I saw and what I witnessed and what I experienced when I was deemed gone, dead by the doctors, that I actually was able to see everything that went on in the room. I actually was able to experience something that other people talk about, an out-of-body experience. And when we talk about God is not the, if God is here, why is there suffering? Why is there disabilities? Why am I having to walk with this walker? Well, I don't take that as a negative thing. I take it as a positive thing, because no matter whether I can walk or not, I still have the faith to believe that God's purpose in me is not necessarily that I walk upright, but that I continue to worship the God that I say I believe in, and have that faith and have that positive attitude, and to do His will.
Absolutely.
I appreciate what you're saying. I graciously still disagree with you.
Sure, and that's your right, right? We all have the right to disagree.
Yeah.
I think we covered
And
it.
because of these,
Yeah,
because
exactly.
Science has been proven wrong.
Oh, sure.
As many times as those who believe in atheism have been, has tried to prove the Bible wrong. You had made a comment about the suffering and how God had, allowed such suffering and children to die and whatnot. According to Scripture, children who are not of the age of accountability, unable to make that decision or have never had that opportunity to have someone share this with them, still have a blank check to get to heaven.
Sure.
The God of the Old Testament, so many people say, is an angry God, and that's just not true. You also made the comment about, let me answer that first. The God of the Old Testament, for example, Jericho, the walls of Jericho, and He says, go in and kill everything that breathes, annihilate it.
Uh-huh.
The reason that was because that culture inside that compound was a very sadistic culture. They worshiped the god of the underworld. They sacrificed their children on an idol they would burn their living children and incinerate them. And God in his love for these children knew that if He didn't He let them go through this over 400 years
Sure.
before he finally said enough is enough. I can't watch my children die anymore. And so I don't see God as an angry, I'm going to smite everybody the second we do something wrong. He gave them over 400 years to correct their behavior. And to me, that was a mercy thing, not a God that was vengeful on these children, the things that they were doing to these children and raping them and burning them alive. They tested them with fire. They literally had a statue that held its hands
Sure.
out, and they incinerated these babies. And
Does anybody, I don't want to interrupt, but
Go
I want
ahead.
to just see if any other students maybe have something that, somebody who hasn't talked, any other students specifically?
What was your name, sir?
Pamela.
Pamela.
I just have a couple of quick statements. Like in your comment, you were saying pretty much.
Could we
that
let
you
him
could-
give a quick reply first?
Oh,
It's really been
sure.
kind of like,
Thank you.
No, we covered a lot of things there. I'm not as familiar with the Scopes trial as I want to be. It is a good example, I'm sure, that scientists can be wrong, but the scientific method of inquiry is never wrong in its tenets. I think what we're dealing with here is a vagueness of terms where science is very hard in the way that it can be very disproven. The Bible could be very historically accurate, and I believe that in parts it absolutely is. All these things could have absolutely happened. I don't see how it follows that in itself proves the existence of God. But then you went on to say, okay, in my personal opinion, I do strongly believe that God is real, and that is great. I don't want to slight that at all. But no, I can very strongly believe that there are square circles, or it's like. But how does it make it so? Does it either God exists or He doesn't? And I'm glad you're still with us, and I'm I've never had a near-death experience, so I can't speak from beyond the grave. I would have to take it on faith, I guess, that you were correct. But looking at, we can't be very wrong. But again, it's there's the law of averages, where if we plug away for long enough, the Einsteins roll around and they come up with general relativity, and all of a sudden it's opening up new doors, and you're realizing there's so much more that we don't know, but yet that we're still plugging away at. And I don't think that it's harmful to say, well, what does my belief in God harm? But at the same time, what is it doing? What is it helping? It's not that you're hurting anyone, but it's like if we were to be as honest with ourselves as we could, is this what we want to rely on for our hope? And for you, I'm glad that you found that hope. I'm glad that it works for you. Sorry, you have one?
It was just brief.
Yes.
The gist of it is I don't think you have to choose Christianity over science. I think they are together. I think Christianity follows science. God is a God of order. He created that science that you are using and stuff. And so I don't think that it has to be either Christianity or science. I think they can be together.
I could see that. I mean, I'd see that there could be some harmony there, but then when you really come to the rub of the young earth or the flood or any of these other things that are tenets of Genesis and the beginning of the Bible, if we're running into it where it's like we're trying to hold on to it, and everyone else is jumping on the bandwagon but they're putting a lot of research into 14.3 billion years old age of the universe. And you have these things where you can believe it and it's fine, but where it hits the uncomfortable part for me is where I realize I'd have to be committing career and academic suicide if I was in certain sciences to say, I absolutely believe that God created everything and evolution is not true. And yes, sir. What was your name?
so I'm going to cut it off because there's a couple other things I want to talk about really quick before.
It's an easy question. It's yes or no.
Okay.
Okay.
Are you a person who experiences the world strictly, and I would put that in capital because that's the emphasis
Sure.
of my question, through sight, sound, taste, touch, hearing.
Yes.
5 senses.
That's a follow-up question.
Okay. Just because there's some other stuff I want to cover before we're going to wrap up for now. Thank you, Jonathan, for coming. Question for you guys. How do you guys feel like you did replying to Jonathan and giving good answers? Did you feel like you were prepared? Were there a lot of things that you were like, man, I just don't know? Like 1 to 10, what would you guys rate? 2? Any other answers?
6.5, 7. I thought we did well.
6.5, 7. Okay.
Personally, me.
Still barely like a pass.
I was like, okay.
Well, like maybe as a group, or even how you feel like you would do. Maybe that's even a better tell, because I think there's some people in the crowd.
I meant
that would-
for myself.
Either, okay.
Not for the whole.
So, I think there's definitely some people that I feel like felt pretty prepared, some people that didn't. I want to share with you guys, Jonathan's not an atheist. Gotcha.
I haven't been honest. I'm sorry.
Jonathan's actually our student president at CSU. And so I asked him just to come to kind of do a Q&A to kind of show you guys, these are the questions and things that you guys are going to interact with when you're in college.
Weirder than you would think.
In some ways,
To
when
take
you're
the
in,
other side.
Yeah. He did a good job. He's prepared a lot for defending Christianity. This was a really weird one for him to go the opposite way around. So with that, I'm just going to get into some other things really quick, just to talk about what apologetics is, why we do it, and that sort of thing. I'm going to steal the mic from you. Sure. So
I think you guys did great, by the way. You had great questions.
my
good questions.
my kind of hope with that is to kind of, hopefully for a lot of you both who have done some preparing, those of you who haven't, can kind of realize, all right, there's a lot of work yet to be done. And so in a lot of ways, realizing that you don't go and defend Christianity unprepared, right? You have to kind of get yourself ready and that sort of thing. And there's a lot to learn. And so this whole area of what we're studying is a thing that we call apologetics. So what is apologetics? It comes from the Greek word apologia, which is in 1 Peter 3:15, that says, always be prepared to give a defense and a reason for the hope that you have in Christ Jesus. And that word defense in the Greek is the word apologia. So you could be giving an apologetic of Chick-fil-A or atheism like Jonathan was trying to do earlier. Apologetic is just a word for defense. So when we're doing Christian apologetics, we're giving a Christian defense to the world. So is it biblical? That's, I think, sometimes a question that people ask me a lot, is because it's a little bit more confrontive than what we're used to. A lot of times we're like, well, it's about relationships and we want to love people, and if I'm arguing with you, then I'm not really loving you. So is it biblical? Absolutely. First of all, you see that verse. You also see a couple of other. 2 Corinthians says, we demolish every pretension that sets itself against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. So that idea of taking something captive, that's pretty active. That's pretty in your face in a lot of ways. And that's what we're trying to do with philosophies, with science, to kind of show like all of these things are actually pointing to Christianity being true. Explaining and proving that the Messiah in Acts 17 is actually considered one of the biggest apologetics passages, because you see some of the disciples, they're explaining and proving the Messiah had to suffer and rise from the dead. And then Paul goes and he reasoned with the Jews and the God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace, day after day, with those who happen to be there. And then he talks about you're ignorant of the very thing that you're worshiping. He talks about they have this dedication to an unknown God, and he kind of uses that to say like, hey, I know who that God is. Let me tell you about him. And so he finds these practical ways to engage with the culture, and that a lot of times I think as Christians we're maybe a little afraid to do. We feel like we need to just kind of sit back and like, well, Lord said to, turn the other cheek, and so we just need to kind of play lame and love people, and that's about it. But that's not how Christianity worked all throughout the New Testament. We have this idea that Jesus is always this really likable guy, really soft and really nice. He turned the tables. He made a whip. Like, that's one of the things that blows my mind always, is because we have this soft idea of who Jesus was. But when he sees something wrong, he even got a little violent with it. He didn't just like grab something to start, like he timely put some work in to create a whip to get some people out of the temple because they're not respecting his Lord's house. And so that's the type of way we need to be engaging and getting into these things. And so that's why we engage in apologetics. Another thing is looking at some of the doubters within Christianity, in early Christianity. John the Baptist, he's doubting whether Jesus is really the Messiah. And so he sends his disciples to go and ask Jesus, are you really the one we've been waiting for? And Jesus' reply is, have faith. Nope, that's not what he says. But yet that's what a lot of times we do as Christians when we're like, well, I'm not sure if there's really a good answer to this. I'm not really sure what to say to you about this question or some of the things that Jonathan brought up. So I'm just going to tell you, hey, just have faith. Just trust the Lord. It's fine. But that's not what Jesus does. He doesn't just say, hey, have faith. Trust a little bit more, John. He says, look at the things I'm doing. Look at the evidence. I'm healing the sick. I'm raising the dead. Look at the evidence that I'm presenting to show you who I actually am. And so that, I think, is then the way that we're supposed to go about it. When Thomas doubts, he says, I won't believe until I feel his hands and his feet and the holes in his hands and his feet. And when Jesus shows up, he doesn't show up to Thomas and just says, Thomas, man, you just need to have more faith. He doesn't just leave it at that and just say, like, man, you just should have trusted, like, and I'm not going to give you any more to go with. He's like, no, check it out. Like, see it. Look at the evidence. And so that's, again, how I think then we're supposed to kind of go about things and really dialogue with it. So to kind of even get a little bit more of an idea, these are some atheists that are pretty well known within culture that a lot of times you as youth might even be engaging with on YouTube and stuff. These are the type of people that, like, they're in pop culture. These are the people that your friends are listening to, and some of them are qualified to be talking about this stuff. Some of them aren't, but they're really dynamic in the way that they talk about it, and so because of that, people listen to them. So Richard Dawkins says, the God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character of all fiction. Jealous and proud of it. A petty, unjust, unforgiving, control freak, vindictive, bloodthirsty, ethnic cleanser, misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, phallicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, settlement, masochistic, capricious, malevolent, bully. A lot of big words. But you get, like, his point there is, and this is so much of the people that we engage with in our ministry, this is the view that they have. Is they look especially at the Old Testament and they're like, you God of love? Like, you gotta be kidding me. That's not a God of love at all. And that's how they view it. But a lot of times when they bring up those things, we as Christians are silent. We don't know what to say. And this is what we need to prepare for. Daniel Dennett, there's simply no way to tell people that they've dedicated their lives to an illusion. Atheism is not a philosophy. It is not even a worldview. It is simply an admission of the obvious. These are the type of people that your friends are reading. They're listening to. They're engaging with in some way or another. Maybe they're not reading Sam Harris straight, but they're listening to someone who has, and they're listening to what he has to say about it because they've made a really cool, well-done YouTube video. Whatever it is like that you're going to hear about. Christopher Hitchens, religion ends and philosophy begins, just as alchemy ends and chemistry begins, or astrology ends and astronomy begins. So he's pointing out, he's just saying, this isn't reason, this isn't logical, this isn't scientific, this isn't historical, all of these things. He's trying to say, you'd have to be nuts. You'd have to be crazy. You'd have to check your brain at the door to be a Christian. You can't be intellectual and believe in God. That's the whole view that so many of these people are putting out. Stay away from church. In the battle over science versus religion, science offers credible evidence for all the serious claims it makes. The church says, oh, it's right here in this book. See? The one written by people who thought that the sun was magic. I, for one, like to see some proof that there is a God. And if you say a baby's smile, I'm going to kick you in the stomach. So not only are they against this, but they're adamantly against it. And they're going to be saying things that are a little funny, or they're going to be engaging with your feelings, different things like that, that, man, you guys got to be prepared. You got to know, how am I going to respond to this sort of stuff? So the state of the matter, if you were in high school, could you stand up? I'm curious to see how many high school, middle school, high school or younger. How many of you guys that are here? How many do we have? 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so keep standing. Okay, look around, see how many of you there are, right? So we got about 10. So I want 3 of you to keep standing and the rest of you to sit down. So you, and you stay standing, the rest of you sit down. Okay? If statistically this youth group is to be what the average is, that's how many of you will continue going to church when you get to college.
No.
We're scared of that.
So you guys can sit down. So statistically, the average amount is 50 to 80% who are regularly going to church in high school will stop going when they're in college. So half to 80% of you will no longer be going to church when you get to college, and it's because a lot of times you have no idea why you believe what you believe. You believe it, but at this point, you haven't really owned it. You haven't been able to see, this is the reason why I believe it. This is how I'm going to dialogue with someone. And then you're going to a school that, on average, college professors identify as atheists 5 times more than the average American. So the majority of your professors don't believe in God, and they'll tell you whether it has anything to do with their subject matter or not. I took philosophy classes. I wasn't surprised when my professors brought that up because, hey, we're talking about God and the proofs for and against God. So that was normal. But when I had all of a sudden, we're talking in my English Shakespeare class about how God is unjust, I was thinking, how the heck did we get here? But that's how it happens. You will get it in the places you least expect it. So that's where, again, you have to come in prepared because you don't know when those objections are going to come up. You could be like, well, when I take my biology class, then I'm going to research the reasons why I can see that that points to an existence of God through science. But it might come up in some other crazy class that has nothing to do with that. So you have to be ready and ready to engage with it. So that's what we're going to kind of take the time doing over this year, or over the next 6 weeks or so, is really engaging with it. And what's so cool about it is I love this picture because it really illustrates the point. When it comes to all these stories that we're watching constantly, honestly, what are they trying to mimic? They're trying to mimic the story of the gospel. Like, you see Iron Man goes up with the nuke, and in some ways we're like, he's dead, it's over, and then he kind of comes back from the dead. What is that? What is that story? He saves the world, dies, and comes back from the dead. That's Jesus. And so we have the one story that this is it. It actually happened. It's true. And so let's get prepared to be able to give a defense of it. So that's what we're going to get into. Next week, we'll kind of start getting into the outline of it. But thank you guys for having me. I think I'll turn it over to you, I guess.
Yeah. Let's give him a round of applause.